Okay. Well, a couple questions. The first has to do with SSL and HMAC. But what about data at rest security controls? Do you know anything?
Yes, I do know a bit about that. First and foremost is that, yeah, so we handle, you can put your site under SSL, and Alpha plays very nicely with that, and most of our customers do that so that their clients have a very comfortable feel with that. But also within the system, we have a full suite of internal XBasic commands that allow you to connect to REST services. And at this point in time, you can obviously connect into REST services. In fact, I've written a example where I'm using or connecting into, say, Dropbox and using their authentication. So we can handle the different authentication schemes for third-party systems. Now, what's neat is, and it works great. The only downside at this point in time, and I want to reiterate that at this point in time, is the fact that you kind of have to write the pieces yourself. But there's a lot of work going on. I'm going to touch on this in a little more detail next week. But first, Alpha is working feverishly to embed sort of the capability to use OAuth and other authentication techniques through web services and embed those into the essentially our framework. So therefore, instead of having to write a bunch of custom kind of HTTP transactional kind of code to talk to other systems, we're going to actually have that built into the system. And the beauty of that is that will alleviate a lot of your heavy lifting in terms of connecting to third-party systems. So it will be much, much easier for you to develop systems that connect to third-party systems in a secure fashion. But also you'll be able to create your own security in terms of allowing other people to connect to your system that's been developed in Alpha. And one of the key things that Alpha is working on is to extend the Alpha security model, and again, we'll talk about this in more detail next week, so that it sort of incorporates the knowledge that Alpha solutions aren't going to be just these islands on their own. They're going to be part of a larger ecosystem. So for instance, just recently, in the last release, you can actually use Google, LinkedIn, Facebook now to authenticate and allow the user to use those login techniques to log into the system. A little different from the question that was asked here, but that's an example of it. But under heavy development right now within the developing team is they're really taking and modularizing or componentizing that security connection to the outside world so that you'll be able to easily connect Alpha into other web services, RESTful services, APIs, and you won't have to write a whole bunch of custom code. And that's in development. We don't have a delivery date yet, but it's really should be slated for early part of next year, which will be really handy for most people that are using and, more importantly, are starting to enable their application to work with third-party systems. And one other note is that, I hope most people have seen, we've released the SaaS framework so that you could actually have a framework for creating your software as a service solution that is now out and available. And that is continually being enhanced also. So that whole concept of software as a service is becoming a core component, and the development team is extending all the web security and authentication techniques so that it's going to make it easy for you to not only lock down your app, but also connect to third-party apps. So that's, I hope that sheds a little bit more light on it. Again, at this point in time, you can write your own code to connect in securely with those third-party systems. It's really not too bad. There's some example code on the out on the message boards, but also very soon it will actually be a core component within Alpha, so it'll become even easier for you to connect to those services.
Great. So we have a couple people who are writing in asking if you wouldn't mind doing an overview of the Alpha Anywhere system. A couple new people. We always like to see that. So if you want to start touching on that, which is something we've done typically in our previous Wednesday webinars. So if you want to just take a crack at that, I know we have at least two people.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do a brief overview, and I'm not going to. I have a few slides here because I like to put in context what Alpha is. So that's one of our important things. And Dave, is my screen coming through A-OK for you?
Yes, it is. I see your screen.
Okay, good. So first, Alpha takes the philosophy of there are many different tools out in the marketplace, and often it's a matter of not is a tool available, it's more of is that the right tool for what you're doing. And traditionally, and really up to now, you've had two paths in terms of developing both web-based systems and also developing mobile, and even more importantly for mobile now. And that's one direction is to go kind of pure native, to use something like Xcode or Swift or a tool like that to code up your solution. The only downside with that is that it has a long learning curve, and it's really a coding task. So a little longer time to develop things, and you need a more experienced crew and a bunch of other things there. The other path that you had was the ability to use these app generators out there. And there's a number of those out there. The downside with that, or the positive, is that you could actually generate something fairly quickly, but the downside is they tended to be very not sophisticated solution. I like to almost call it brochureware, where you can put some static pages, maybe a few other things out there, but it doesn't really have the horsepower to connect into back-end databases and connect into third-party services, things like that. So Alpha really took the philosophy of, well, we can build the tool that kind of marries the best of both worlds. You could have the ease of use of an app generator along with the rich development environment that a native development tool gives you. So that's what Alpha Anywhere is. It's a next-generation mobile and web development platform. You can use one tool for both environments. It uses a low-code philosophy, which I'll talk about in a moment. It's a rich development environment for advanced requirements, and it's really good for seamless mobile app generation using the new PhoneGap capability. So first, it is the next generation mobile. It kind of blends that ease of use of an app generator, but also has a very rich development environment, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes here. We use what's called a low-code development methodology, and low-code is becoming more popular as a term in the industry to really describe what Alpha has put together. And to really explain what low-code is, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what are the benefits of using a low-code process, i.e. generating more of your solution with less actual hands-on coding. But at the same point of being able to dive in and go to the details to code what you need. So first is productivity. With low code, you can generate more functional capability in your application in a shorter period of time. So therefore, you can get that product out working and functioning to the desire of your client or your business. Another part of it is that since you're spending your time focused on generating functionality instead of coding, you can focus on the value add to the end client or end user. And therefore, you're spending more time engaging them, developing and giving in the feedback in their hands to find out how it goes from there. The other is that you have a higher level of responsiveness to customer requirements. So as you develop, if you can turn around and provide the end client with what they're looking for in a shorter period of time, your responsiveness goes way up. And one of the cool benefits of that is not only is the client happen, but you can use more of an agile development process as you develop your tool. So therefore, you immediately get that feedback from your end clients or users of what's working, what's not, what they like, what they don't like, what they think, and really it allows you to drive that application to achieve its really full potential in a much shorter period of time. Very, very powerful there. Also, because you're spending more time on the value add and the functionality instead of spending time debugging code, you're seeing time and cost savings. So that time is spent on developing the capabilities, not developing the code to eventually deliver the capabilities. So you can deliver things much quicker, and therefore time is money, and you can save a lot of money in that scenario. The other key aspect of low code is the fact that you have a higher level of reliability. Since big chunks of the actual code that's running is developed by the tool, you're in a situation where the actual code is more reliable. It's been tested, validated, hammered on by many, many people. So therefore, you have less issues. You have to spend less time debugging that piece. Thus, you get a higher level of reliability, which always is a very big benefit for your end clients and customers. One thing I want to make sure is, even though we use a low-code process, we are developing and deploying on industry standards. And that's critical for two reasons. The system generates HTML5, CSS, JavaScript, and connects to industry standard backends such as SQL databases, DB2, other functional capabilities, web services. Now, there's a really powerful reason for, or as I mentioned, two reasons. One is that since we develop pure, or deploy that pure HTML, CSS, and JS, we actually work very well on many different platforms. So we're going to work well on the different browsers. We're going to work well on the different mobile platforms. So you can actually use this process to develop once and deploy across many different platforms. And that's critical because that really radically increases your productivity. In fact, I was working with a recent client of ours, and they were developing an internal, or actually a customer service, and they made the decision that they were going to be mobile only from the get-go. And what they wanted to do was make sure they could handle all the different mobile platforms out there. Well, with Alpha, because we use industry standards, because we have the techniques to be able to deliver one solution that works on multiple platforms, they were able to quickly develop and deploy it, and more importantly is that internally they could use a whole bunch of internal people with different handsets, like Android versus iOS, and they had a very successful solution there. The other benefit of building on industry standards is this. All of these are heavily supported, and all of the different vendors out there are working very, very hard to make HTML, CSS, and JavaScript work better and better and better. So you'll notice one of the key things you always see when Android releases their piece or Apple releases their iOS, they always talk about their benchmarks of how much faster it's rendering HTML, how much more flexible the CSS is, and how much faster the JavaScript runs. So the cool thing about that is that as you develop with Alpha, the industry is going to make your solutions faster, smaller, better, because the platforms you're running on are improving on a continual basis. And it really is neat to be able to see as they increase the capability, especially in the JavaScript engine, you're able to see a much better performance of your application. And Alpha is dedicated to supporting these industry standards, and there's a continual focus by the development team that is really focused on improving that. So an example, in the last release of Alpha, traditionally, when you were doing your server-side computations, you have your client side, and then on your server you have our app server. You were using a language called XBasic, which is a very powerful, very rich language for integrating with databases, doing heavy-duty calculations, business logic, etc. But in the last release, Alpha enabled you to then use server-side JavaScript as the language of choice for the server. So now, instead of just having to learn XBasic, you can now use server-side JavaScript. And there's really cool things. One is it uses the Google V8 engine, which is extremely fast, and they're putting a huge amount of money into it. So it's very powerful, very stable, very fast. But also, there's a huge amount of people out there who now know server-side JavaScript, Node.js, and other techniques like that. In fact, JavaScript is probably the most widely known programming language in the world at this time. It allows you to bring in other resources. So again, Alpha is built on industry standards. We use a low-code process, so you spend more time developing functionality. But all of that runs on top of these industry standards, and the beauty of it is you're going to get the benefit of being able to work everywhere nicely and leverage all the amount of investment that's going into these industry standards. And you're really going to enjoy it. In fact, as you get into using the tool and you start bringing in third-party solutions, you're going to see how easily they connect into the environment on an ongoing basis. Now, that all said, that we're a low-code platform, we also have a very rich development environment. So one of the problems of app generators we have seen in the past is that 80-90% rule, meaning that you build about 80-90% of your application, then all of a sudden you realize that there's that 10% that is something unique, is something that's different, that is a different type of system that you have to incorporate into your application. And that's where a lot of app generators end up running out of gas. What will happen then is you're kind of stuck. You have to either go in and generate a whole bunch of custom code and redo your whole project. You have to jump to another platform. But with Alpha, we have this rich development environment that will allow you to go ahead and implement and integrate those third-party capabilities into it. And this rich development environment even encapsulates very complex things such as native offline support. And that's a great example where what we did is through our analysis of what people were using with our application, they realized that people were developing mobile applications, but they had a very strong requirement to allow those mobile applications to be used disconnected. Now, what was happening out there is that a lot of people were using other solutions. They would go ahead and deploy or build their connected solution, and then all of a sudden their clients would come back and say, hey, you know what? My guys are out in the field. They're in oil fields, and they don't have Wi-Fi or satellite, so how can I support this? And they end up having to rip apart and rebuild their whole solution and to make it disconnected. Well, Alpha brought in those complex requirements into our tool, and now building native offline support, meaning building native offline mobile applications, is a matter of a few clicks, but you are still given all of the hooks and capabilities to allow you to modify how that behavior works. So for instance, you could have it auto-synchronize, or you can manually synchronize. If there's problems with synchronization of data from the mobile device to the back-end system, you can take control of that process and apply your own logic to it. And all of that has been thought out and built into the system. So, you know, the cool thing with Alpha is you're not going to get stuck where you get to that one point and you go, well, I can't really develop this solution because I've just run out of steam. No, you're going to find that you have a very rich, full-blown development environment behind the scenes that allows you to go in and complete and deliver those extra capabilities that are really critical to the application for your client or customer. And you're not going to have to jump ship and go off and build it on a whole other platform, be able to do something along those lines. Very, very powerful there. And now with PhoneGap Build, Alpha has the ability for you to not only create web-delivered solutions onto mobile devices, but also deliver it as an app. And those apps can be Android, iOS, Windows Mobile. And you get two real benefits. One is that it's now an app, so it can be downloaded and installed on the mobile device. It uses all of the local resources of the mobile device, local storage for storage of data, but also very, very cool is the ability for you to connect into the complete set of APIs that are available through the PhoneGap Build product. So you can attach the accelerometer, the camera, all the capabilities in that, the notification systems, the vibration systems, all that. So you can actually enhance your Alpha applications by leveraging those PhoneGap APIs. And what's really fun about that is that the Alpha development team continues to make it even easier for you to access those APIs by bringing in sort of chunks of capability within the Alpha tool that are aware of the API that you can connect, and so that it becomes even simpler for you to generate very powerful native feel of capability within that. So what's really neat is Alpha really provides an enormous amount of capability. It's easy to use but is rich, so you can develop very complex, very complete solutions. It uses a low-code development process which delivers all these different benefits to you as a developer and as a business. It's got that rich development environment, so you're never going to get stuck. And with PhoneGap Build, you can really create these mobile applications in a very short period of time without having to spend weeks or months coding. In fact, I'm working on a project right now where it was developed for mobile, and within a day they have it fully moving and working on on both iOS and Android, and it's looking and operating great. And it's because of the tight integration with PhoneGap Build. So that's kind of a quick and fast overview of the Alpha environment, specifically what we do and how we do from that standpoint. I could go under.
That's great.
Yep.
We have some other questions as well. But
great, excellent. That's what I want to go do.
For the people who asked, look, I'm just beginning, and I'd like to know a basic overview. If you have more questions along those lines, please send them in here, or you can do them offline, and we can get back to you later. If you want to send any questions at all, send them to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com. Now, as far as
also real quick on a note on that, because some people may be looking a little bit more in depth of like a demo of how to build something for today, which we don't have in the scope. Have them go ahead and email us, and we can make arrangements to make sure they get satisfied.
Right.
I want to make sure they don't walk away
we can
unhappy.
Exactly right. A couple questions here. First one is from Brian, who asks, "Can I upload large files easily?" He said, "Also, can I upload multiple files?" And I presume he means multiple files at the same time. Put these in blobs into the document record.
The answer is yes. The Alpha solution, and I can go actually into it. Oops, no, I don't want to cancel that. Gotta get my keyboard back up there. There we go. The Alpha solution has a very rich set of file management capabilities, both file management on the server, but also more importantly, file upload capability. And what's neat about it is there's a couple different ways you can handle file upload in the system, and there's a very rich sort of capability. Let me go ahead and go into my development environment, and for the new people, this is the Alpha development environment. It's a Visual Studio kind of environment that has all the capabilities. I'm going to go ahead and create a new UX component, and Alpha ships with a whole bunch of very powerful components such as video players, image galleries, full mapping capability. But I'm going to create what's called a UX, which is a user experience or form-like component. And again, we ship with a whole bunch of pre-made default templates that you can use, but I'm just going to create a blank one for right now. Now, in the system, within it, and you're kind of seeing a blank screen right here, but often what you do is you connect into a back-end system. And I think in terms of the question here, what you'd be most likely doing is you can store files one of two really core ways. One is you can actually insert that file into the database as a blob. So that's method number one. And in fact, what Alpha has, which is really cool, is what's called a data-bound image in DB. So for instance, actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead. I don't know if I have that there. But this data-bound image is really neat because what you do is you connect it to the table and to the field in that table. And what it will do is it will actually do two things. One is if there's a blob image in that, it will automatically render that image in this field on the form so you can actually see the image. And it takes care of the sizing and everything else that's associated with that. But also, which is really powerful, is when you do data connection, when you connect this into that database, there is a technique that allows you to attach an image to upload into this image field, and then it takes care of all the work to store that image as a blob in the database for you. Now, what is also very powerful about that is that you can, and I'll show you in a few moments, you don't have to necessarily store the image in the database. You could also create another type of image, which is a standard image control field, and you could upload that image as a file on the server. And that's, a lot of people are using that technique. So what they'll do is they'll put a file on the server, and then in the database they'll put a reference to that file. But the real powerful thing, and let me go ahead and show you how this is, I'm going to create a button here. And this button, and I don't have it fully connected, but this button, when I click on it, it opens what's called our Action JavaScript. And what Action JavaScript is really just an easy way to add behavior to a button. So the behavior I'm going to go ahead and ask is...
If I can interrupt you just for 1 second.
Oh, sure. Is it running a little too slow? Or?
No. Everything's running great. But Brian is pointing out that, images are our example of large files. His example, though, is probably voice files. So...
yeah, and so in that scenario, I'm using image here, but any kind of file can be inserted into the database as a blob field.
Great.
And the file upload, which I'll show you in a moment, can operate on any type of file that you want to work with from that standpoint.
Thanks.
Now, in this situation, it's like if you wanted to have like a voice like a WAV file, you will probably have to use, there's not a default WAV file player that I'm aware of in here, but all you have to do is use a embedded like JavaScript player or third-party player that points to the file name, and the browser will actually display the player control for you. So, if you're going to play, like for image, the browser defaults and does the image rendering and showing for you. If it's like a WAV file or some other kind of audio file, then you just got to make sure that you have the player that's available to have the browser show and play that. But that's easy to do within the system. But I do want to show everybody one thing which is really critical, and this is a part of that low-code process, is that built into the system are these action JavaScripts. So for instance, file download, file upload user define. And basically this allows you to put a button on there that you click OK, and you tell it what kind of type you want to do. Is it an absolute file name, like you want to download a WAV file that's on the local system or on the server? You could point to another control on it. You could do an AJAX callback to call the server, etc. So you have complete control over this. And then what we'll do is it will download this, and this can all be secured. The more powerful one here, and I'm going to go back in here, is the file upload. And wait, let me do this real quick. I have to add this file upload download there. So basically, I've got a file upload download control, and I'm going to click this button and say add a new action, which is file upload. Okay, so I'm going to use the file upload control, and now if you notice, I have complete control over that process. So for instance, I can tell it what allowed file extension. So for instance, if you only want them to upload a WAV file, you could put a .wav or .jpeg or PNG. You have actions like, should I overwrite the file that exists? What is my maximum file size? Should I show a progress button with allow to cancel? And then also a whole bunch of other things that are available. Now, this will go ahead and upload that file and put it into the database. And the beauty of it is you didn't have to write one piece of code. It handles all of the uploading process, the putting into the database, and confirming to the user that that's happened. But if you want, you also have the ability to do what's called a user-defined one, where what happens is, and I'll go ahead and show you what that looks right here. So I'm going to add it new there. I'll go File, User-Defined. Now what I can do is I can have multiple files being uploaded. I can have a certain size of the file. But what's neat about it is that once you do the upload, you can actually fire off a function, process, files, or whatever you want to call it. And what will happen is this will upload the file for you. It will give you a list of the files that have been uploaded, and then you can manipulate those files however you want. For instance, you could then rename them. You could move them to a different place on your hard drive, whatever you happen to be from that standpoint. Very, very powerful from that. And if you're using image upload, it will actually automatically generate thumbnail images for you. So for instance, if you wanted to have like a large size image, but you wanted to have thumbnails to increase the speed of your operation, that's all built into it. And this is a great example of low code. If you'll notice here, I'm not writing a lot of code. I'm basically clicking and pointing, and the system is taking care of all the file upload, the moving, the inserting into the database, and handling of those things from there. So a bit of a long-winded response, but that was a great question. And you're not limited to just image files. As you'll notice, it's just file upload, and you can then manipulate that file, PDF files, whatever it happens to be. that are available within the system. You can have full functionality. You could upload files and then immediately convert them. You could do a whole bunch of things that are very powerful from that standpoint.
Excellent. That's great. We have a couple more questions. This one's a little bit involved, but I think probably a good one. This one is from.
If we can't answer it here, we'll get a start on it.
So Colin asks, how do you set up field validation when you're using the list control with the detail edit option and panel cards to display field errors? For example, how would you set up a required field? Is there some sort of example that you could point to?
Let me see if I can do that real quick. Let me see if I have an example already pre-built here. That's there. Demo. There we go. Okay, I think this was one I put together recently. So the key, and for the people who are new to this, let me go ahead and show you an example of what it looks like. So I'm in the development system here. On the left-hand side, you have your controls. In the middle, you have the layout of your structure of your form. And on the right, you have all the detail records on the right. And the discussion was if you had a list view, which now has what's called a detail view. So let me go ahead and show you this in operation since I have it running here. So I'm going into my working preview. You'll notice I have a list view, and I can drag and drag this up and down. And basically all a list view is that it pulls data from either a static list, a database, etc., and displays it so that the user, and you've seen this in many, many different mobile solutions. So I'm going to click on one there and go to the next field, and now I'm on what's called the edit or detail view. And you'll notice, and I apologize if it's a little hard to see on the screen, but when I select a specific item, go to this screen, you'll notice that it is added in there. Now what I can do is if I want to change a region, I can type it in and click Save, and this detail view has been persisted into, in this case, the list, and this is working in disconnected, but you'll notice this little orange caret there. It actually hasn't been saved to the database. So let me make another change here. Save that. Now I've got two records that have been changed but are not in the database, but I click Synchronize, and it writes that information back to the database. So a little bit long, but that's kind of the scenario. So I have a list that connects to a detail view. Now the question was, if I've got a list and a detail view, how do I do validation on these detail view records right here? And built into the system, you have a full set of validation rules for these items here. So let's take one, for example, this region. You have this validation rule here that allows you to say, okay, on that text field, I'm going to enable that, and I'm going to require a value. So in this case, I want to require a value for this. And so it allows you to create validation rules on there. If you want to do data validation, you can do it as a simple or a complex expression. So let's say this region had to have a certain formatting or a certain structure. You can do a validation on that. Now, you have to be careful is that it also has this ability to do what's called a cross-file validation, where I can select a connection string to the database and have it say, oh, the item in this text field actually has to be in the database from somewhere else. The problem with that is that will only work when you're in a connected mode, because it's going to make a call back to the server, and within the server you're going to be having a situation where if you're not connected to the server, that validation will not work. But you can use JavaScript to do the validation also. And that's probably long-winded. That's probably the answer to your question, is that within it, we can enable the rules here and use the built-in, but also within this, you can have your own JavaScript that is available so that when someone changes a text field, you could do a JavaScript of just on the change of that text field. You can sit here and actually write JavaScript where you're saying, if get value this dot value is greater than 100 or something like that. And in this case, you're just using pure JavaScript. And the beauty of that is that it will run on the local system and will work, and you won't have to be connected into a back-end database. So the real answer is you can use the built-in validation, but also do know that you can use JavaScript to do validation and manipulation of the information as it's entered into the solution. And as I've spoke before, you can actually download information the first time this UX is loaded, so you could actually have some static data that's available for you to compare against for validation. So there's a number of different scenarios that are available for that. Now, one of the things I want to make sure that people understand about the list control and these items there is if I go in the list control and I go into the list properties, or I'm sorry, the fields right here, where is that? Let's go. Oh, detail view. You have a full set of events, and those events are available for you to also do validation. So for instance, in this list control, in the detail view, you could say after, or like can update list, you can actually go in here, pull the values, and do validation in here. So you could actually put into the detail view the event, and as you can see, we have a very rich set of events. So like, for instance, can new record. This is going to fire when a new record is happening. So the cool thing about that is you could actually look at some fields, look at their values, and then say, go ahead and make manipulations, and if the function returns false, then it will cancel the insertion. So there's a full set of sort of behaviors or events that are available for you to do it. So, you know, your method is you can either do immediate validation there, or you can do validation on using the events on the detail view that will allow you to quickly allow you to do those pieces from there. So that's kind of your two different ways that you can do validation using kind of a list control and a detail view from that standpoint. And I'm not sure where the other field is here. No, that I hope that gives you enough pointer to kind of get you started down that road and be able to use that from that standpoint.
Great. On that, just while we're on that topic, a question from Paul is, when you use a client-side show hide expression to hide a column in a grid, how do you get the column heading to be hidden as well?
Oh, that's a good question. So you have a client-side show hide. Mm-hmm. I'm probably going to have to follow up and send that because I kind of remember how to do it, but I haven't done grids in a little bit, so I'm a little rusty. So client-side show hide column, and it needs to hide the header.
Heading, right?
Okay. Cool.
Paul, do us a favor and send in just an email to guides@alphasoftware.com just so we make sure that we have your email address so we can address it certainly next time we have a webinar, but we can get you the answer sooner than that. And we just want to make sure you have your contact info. We have two questions here which sound different, but I think are actually quite related. The first one is someone asking if we could see a little bit about how to use PhoneGap. The second one is it possible, in an app, is it possible to integrate scanning by using your smartphone's camera?
And the answer is yes to both of it. So let me talk a little bit about that. When you build with Alpha, you use the same technique to build a web deployed solution as you do a PhoneGap. There's a few nuances because specifically if you're going to be working in disconnected mode, you have to make sure certain things are set up a certain way. For instance, in Alpha, you have the ability to do what's called a embedded object or embedded UX, and that will work if you're connected but won't. So there's a few little nuances that are, in terms of how to do it. But once you have built your solution, so you'll notice here that my solution is working inside my simulator, my working preview, and I'm able to set up, edit, and do modifications, etc. from there. I can then check it in live preview, or more importantly is I can actually launch it in a web browser, and I'm opening this up in a web browser, and I can test it here. So then I can get a little bit more closer to the fidelity of how to do the system here. So as you'll notice now, I'm running in a web browser, and everything is working the same way I had from that standpoint there. And I can synchronize, do all that pieces from there. Okay, now the next step, and I'll get to the PhoneGap in a moment, but you can also do what's called a remote test. And what the remote test does is it displays a QR code, and you won't, if you scan this, you won't be able to connect because it has to be on the same network as my local machine here. But you can actually point this QR code, use a QR code scanner and point it to, and it will actually run on your mobile device running off your development server. So once all those pieces are kind of in place, now we're ready to go ahead and turn this into a PhoneGap application. And the way we do that is very straightforward. What we do is the first thing we do is we go to our web projects control panel, and then what you do is you click on the PhoneGap button up here in the upper right-hand corner. Okay? Now, you'll need to have a PhoneGap account. Let me see if I've got mine all out. Okay, so you'll have a PhoneGap account. They're free accounts. If you're going to start deploying for real, they're very inexpensive, $10 for 5 apps. Very, very cheap from that standpoint. So what we do is on PhoneGap, first we put in our credentials. Then what we do is we say what platform we want to run for, Android, iOS there. When you click that, what it does, it actually shows you all of the different things that you can then access. So for instance, camera. And so the cool thing about that is that PhoneGap has all these core plugins and these connectors into the notification system, vibration, into OAuth, or authorization, to the local messaging, etc. Now, the user is going to have control over what you can connect to, but you can put the hooks that are in there from that standpoint there. So once we've set up our login, what platform we're going to build for, we now are asked what is the component we want to use. So in this case, I'm going to use the that one I was showing you before. Now, I'm just going to heads up, if I deploy this isn't going to work because it's pointed to a local database here. But if I were to really deploy this, I would have set up a publicly available database I can connect in. But I wanted to show you the process of how it goes from there. So with that, I can also specify any other additional files. Let's say I'm including some image files or some JavaScript files or things along this line. And once I'm happy with that, all I have to do is click Save and Upload to PhoneGap Build. And if my credentials are right, let's see what's happening. It's logging me in. Oh, maybe I have the wrong credentials. Let's see if it's working. Hold on 1 second. I want to look up something on another system here.
Dion, while you're doing that, if I could just grab the screen for a second, I'd like to show someone something on the website, which I think will be helpful to this. So, okay, presenter, show my screen. Great. So we're taking a look here at the Alpha Software website, but what I'd like you to see is take a look at the Events and Webinars section. And if you scroll down to our Developers Conference, we actually have the presentations and stuff from our Developers Conference, one of which was a really good presentation on PhoneGap and how to make it all work. It was done by Bob Moore. So you'll scroll down to Bob Moore's section. And here's the video, in which it's an hour-long session in which he goes over the entire process. But he also gives you these directions using the PhoneGap App Builder, which are available as a PDF. And this really lays out exactly what it is that you need to do, how to get your account set up, how to build. There are sample examples and all that. It shows you where to get those. And you can basically grab these examples here. Some of the PhoneGap examples actually still are currently shipping with Alpha Anywhere as well. But I encourage you, if you're interested in PhoneGap, to check that out. We're also, this week we started our Master's Class series on PhoneGap. So Bob gave the first of his presentations. That's a paid webinar, but is available to people who are registering or getting Alpha Anywhere or renewing Alpha Anywhere. currently. So I just wanted to show you that resource. There are other great things from the conference page as well. So again, check out the events and webinars from the support page of Alpha Software. Scroll down to the Developers Conference and take a look at the events there. We also have on this page other webinars that people have done. Here's one for Aperion. Here's one for our SAS framework. So do check those out if you're interested. All right, thanks, Dean. I'm going to give you back.
No problem. And I found I just didn't have my right credentials, so I'll just do this real quick.
Okay. I just passed.
So now
make sure you click OK to share your screen. There we go. Great.
There we go. So again, I select what UX. I put in my credentials. I say save and upload to PhoneGap Build. It's uploading it to PhoneGap Build. And this is a great example of low code because if you'll notice, I'm not writing scripts and doing a whole bunch of weird things. I'm clicking on the items that I want. It takes a moment here. It's probably a little slower because of our webinar going on at the same time. There we go. Okay, so what it's done is it's now uploaded, and I click OK. Okay, so this is a quick view, and it shows my app and the status right now. So if you'll notice in here, the app is being built, and in a moment.
So this answers Nathan's question.
There we go.
Can you build both iOS and Android at the same time? And sure enough, you
even
can.
WinPhone also.
So all three of them are built simultaneously. Yep. You don't do anything
correct.
extra. Yep.
I guess they're really busy up there because it should be. Okay, now you'll notice that it took 2 cycles, so about 14 seconds, and now you'll notice it's saying that my app is complete. So if I click on here, it now shows you. And I feel free if people want to point their phones. It's an Android, so it'll only be on Android. But what this will allow you to actually do is now I can download that app to my Android device, and I've got an app built. And as you can see, it only took a matter of a few minutes to repurpose my web-based app into that. Now again, it's going to fail because it can't connect to my database locally. I'll have to next time I'll have to make sure I'm using an external database that's out there. But that's how simple it is to generate apps within Alpha, and you have complete control over if you want to do special things. You can tie into the local APIs and things like that. So I hope that gave a little bit better feel for what and how the PhoneGap operation. But as Dave said, there's much more extensive videos that show you all the ins and outs and the details of how to do that.
Great. Here's just a quick question from Todd, who asks, can I host the application on my local machine but have it point to a remote SQL server?
The answer is yes. The way we do that is through what's called connection strings. So in your Web Projects Control Panel, there's something up here called Tools, Alpha DAO Connection Strings. And what a connection string is really just a pointer to a data source. But it's more powerful than just a pointer because it not only knows where to get access, but it also knows what it is and how to connect to it. So if I wanted to create a new one, I can build a connection string, and I can have on here DB2, Excel, MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, even QuickBooks, a whole bunch of different ones from there. So you tell it where to go and then what are the usernames and passwords. So that creates a connection. And so when I'm developing, I have this connection. Now, the other powerful part about it is that, let's say during your development you have a test database on your local machine. So it's using, in this case, a little access table right there. What you can do, which is really powerful, is that when you go to publish your web project, which is to package up the code so it's sitting on the app server so it can run, you have the ability to go in here and create your own connection string. So you can now say, okay, when I'm running on that server, I now want to use a different connection string for the database. So it's not going to use your development database. And that database can be locally on the machine. It could be halfway across the world. It could be anywhere, because basically the app server is going to call out to that database server wherever it happens to be. So long-winded is you have a lot of flexibility to kind of connect to multiple, to connect to databases how you want to. And also realize you're not limited to one database. So therefore, if you have 2 or 3 databases you're interacting with, you could have those different connection strings and be able to have within one solution interconnect and connect to the other ones pretty readily.
Excellent. Actually, while you're here, would you mind, I don't know if maybe I just missed it, but would you mind just running through the quick steps to connect to a SQL Server database? Because it is pretty easy.
Oh, sure. Yeah, okay. So I've actually got, do I have it on there? I wonder. I think I have a local one here, but I'll go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and connect to a local database. So the first step is when you're on the Web Projects Control Panel, you go to Tools, Alpha DAO Connection Strings. And so that's how you connect to the database. So you go Tools, Alpha DAO Connection Strings. And then in here, if you're starting out, this will be blank, but then you click the New button down here. And then it comes up with a little dialog. Now, we're going to give this a name for our system. The convention is CONN for your first one, just because often other developers use that, so it's easy to do. But you can call it anything you want to. You can go, HR database. Whatever you would like to call it is up to you. Then down here, you'll see it says connection string, and then it has this build. So then I click build. It opens up another little dialog that allows you to pick which database you want to go against. So you could go against an Access database, MySQL is there. Let me see if I have a SQL Server. So I'm going to select the type of database, okay, and you'll notice it's starting to build the connection string for you. And in this case, let's see what it's doing here. It's automatically defaulted some stuff, so I'm going to do refresh, and let's see if I have an active SQL Server on this machine. I think I do, but we'll see in a moment.
One question.
What it's doing is
one question I think that people often find, at least I certainly did when I started connecting to SQL databases, is where it said server local. I was wondering, well, okay, but my server is over at, mysql.com or something like that. Like, how do I get that filled in? And it turns out that field you could just type right into. It's not strictly a type
field. Yeah, you can go 192.188.
Exactly.
And then the port is usually like 3306, but in your environment it may be something different, whatever it happens to be.
And typically leaving it to default seems to work. I have connected it quite a few times. And then the last thing that I find is that use Windows authentication, that usually gets unchecked, and you fill in a username and password for the database. You don't have to; it may not be set up that way for you, but that's a very typical configuration when you're running something on a local machine, but you want to connect to a SQL Server that's off on a server someplace else that's not on your machine.
If you're using local, often you use Windows authentication because you're kind of inside your own little firewall. Right. But agreed, you can just put in your user, and your DBA will provide you all that information. They'll give you a server, the port, and then your credentials to log in. And the cool thing about it is once you've got those pieces in place, you can click this refresh button here, and you'll know immediately if you can connect to that database, because it will populate that from that database server the available databases. So for instance, in this case, I've got the master, but then 3 different ones. I can click there, and now you'll notice that it's built the connection to my local host. It's put all that information in there. If there is a password, it will encrypt that so that you can't casually see that for there. And then you can click this test connection, and then if you can connect into it, you've succeeded. So therefore, the cool thing about that is that you're going to know that you have a solid connection to your database before you go into development mode. Because once you've kind of go through this and click succeeded, boom, that connection string will now work across your application. And again, this connection string right here, when you deploy to the server, you can specify a different connection string. So maybe it's the same database server, but it's a different database on there. And therefore, when it runs on the server, it's going to access that database versus the database on your local system. And so that's just a quick and dirty kind of process on how to do that.
That's great. So we are running a little tight on time, but we do have a couple more questions. First one here is from Rob, who asks, who says he has a list control with a freeform layout on a UX component. And he says he's grouped the list data by the date field, but the date currently displays as the date, like 11/30/2014, followed by the time, 12 a.m. He says he's changed the date format under the display format in the Fields tab, and that works if the data is in the data section, but not if it's in the header. Is there a way to format the date in the group header template so that only displays the date and not the time at the end of it?
Gotcha. Okay. So this is a list control, correct?
Yes.
And on the list layout,
it looks like
is it using a columnar, I guess?
It's using but it looks like a group header is where he's trying to put the data. He said in the field itself it works fine, but it's up in the header.
Okay. This format directive is the way to go, and I'm not sure if I have a date field, but I'm going to pretend. So just to show for the people who are not familiar with it, when you create a list control, you have your data source, you have your fields, and you can edit the display format here. You also have the list layout, which is how it's going to actually render. So you'll notice it's just a piece of HTML here, and if I do preview list, it's going to show me what it's going to look like from that standpoint. So pretend with me for a moment. Let's say I had a field in here, and we'll just go ahead and call that's called, date field. Okay. So in my list, this is going to come out and display that data. But you have down here what's called a format directive, where you can actually sit there and put in a date and say, for instance, that date format. And what it's going to do is that will help direct it. And there's a description in here, where is it, help format directives, that talks about how you can take any of this text and have it form. So for instance, your field, the date, and then it will format it in that format there. So what I would suggest is look into this help format directives and the format directive in your list builder under list layout, and that should give you the pointer to make sure that you're anywhere you point your a field is displayed, it's going to display in the proper format for what you would like. And that's what this format directive is. And again, they have a nice help function called help format directive that talks about formatting numbers and dates. And what it does is that it basically formats it as a JavaScript date object, which then works well when it's actually displayed on the web browser or the mobile device.
Excellent. Here's a workflow question. And I'd like to say, if we didn't answer any of your questions properly, again, we will. You don't have to wait till next Wednesday. We'd be happy to get to you sooner. Just send us an email. Please send us an email, guides@alphasoftware.com, and I'll make sure that it goes to the right person. Just one last question. We have about 2 minutes. This has to do sort of with a workflow kind of thing. Norman is interested in building an application in which he's going to scan something in using the phone's camera, but he wants to make sure that he can't go on to the next step of data entry until that step is done. Is it possible to have Alpha control the flow like that? And I'll let you go further.
Yeah, the way I would approach that is I would break your application into a set of panel cards. Basically, what for the folks that aren't familiar with it, our process is that you have something called a panel navigator, and think of it as a traffic cop. And then within a panel navigator, we have a set of panel cards. So in my case, I have my first panel card that shows the customers, and then I have a second panel card that shows the details, and then I have a third panel card that's just right now just some static text. So if I go in here, you'll notice that on my first panel card, I've got, sorry, a little notification there. I thought I turned off all notifications. Sorry there, everybody.
Well, is it really 55 degrees there in Austin?
Yeah, it is, and it's misty and foggy. Oh. And I don't know where 701 Valley View Drive is, because that's definitely not where I am. I think it's like another street off. So, okay, let's get this off here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so back where I was. I apologize, everybody. But I've got my first panel card with the list. Then I have my second panel card that has the detail view, and then I have this third panel card there. So the way I would approach that And also to let you know is that panel cards can be used either can sort of like how you navigate from card to card is determined by this navigator type. So in my case, I have programmatic. It could be carousel, and if I go to carousel, watch what happens. I can literally drag, like I can drag it back and forth like I'm swiping. So it's taking care of the navigation. But what you want to do is go to programmatic, and now what I would do is I would create a panel card to do your first step, and then on that panel card have a button that is only enabled after that step is completed. And then inside that button, and I'll show you how to do it real quick, you can say, I can add a button, and I can go and I can say panel, set active panel to be, say, panel card number 2. So basically what happens is when I click this button here, it's going to take me to the second panel card where I'll do my next step of my edit process. But this button right here, what's nice about it is that you have what's called an enable expression down here, and this is a JavaScript expression that can say, for instance, only allow this button to be clicked if they filled out some other fields on this panel card. And so that's the way I would do it. Is the panel cards on here, I've got the way it's working right now on this is that this button would only become enabled after I sort of do the things I need to do on this panel card, and then when I click that button, it would take me to this panel card where I could go through and do the next steps of the process, and I could have a button that would take me back to this other panel card if needed. So that's how I would approach that workflow, is by using panel cards, because then the information will swap in and out as the person completes the process.
That's great. Well, we are out of time. Again, if you have additional questions, send them to guides, GUIDES, @alphasoftware.com.